As a science fiction reader, I love books that challenge my perspective. Books that constantly make me understand the world around me in a new or different way.
The world has changed around me.
And that's why I did this project, reading science fiction books around the world. The idea of this project isn't to recommend all of these books, but rather to help you recognize some of the titles and authors of these books and get some of these out to readers that may really appreciate them. All of these books challenged me in some way, some of them more than others, and I will mention them as we go along. Now, this project is a big one, and I'm not going to be able to get to all of it in a single video. So this is going to be part one of several, I hope, throughout my channel as I continue to read all of the books that I'm trying to get to. If you happen to know of any that I should definitely check out, I have to have an English translation. Otherwise, no holds barred. Let me know in the comment section down below. I'm going to start with 7.5 different countries for this video, so let's get into this. All right, the first country that I want to talk about, in no particular order, is going to be Russia or the USSR. So for some reason, I have been reading quite a lot of Russian science fiction literature, so I decided that I needed to go ahead and include this country on the list, even though I haven't quite gotten to all of them that I want. Now, the first book in this list is going to be We by Yevgeny Zamyatin. And if you haven't heard me talk about this book before, I was blown away by it. It is an incredible book that is probably the granddaddy of all dystopian novels. If it's not the first, it's one of the few progenitor ones, and it definitely inspired both 1984 and Brave New World, both of which are classics in today's modern era. So I wish this book would be talked about a little bit more. I really had a good time with it, and I do recommend you watching out on the translation because some translations are definitely better than others. What I found was particularly interesting about We is it focused on one man's specific journey instead of the global picture, and it made us really guess and speculate a little bit more. I thought this story was particularly interesting because Zamyatin wrote this book sort of tongue-in-cheek about the communist government that was taking over. This author got to see the fall of the Russian czars and the takeover of communism, and it was in response to what communism became that he wrote this novel. It was an incredibly interesting read, and I would highly recommend it. The next one on this list is going to be Roadside Picnic by the Strugatsky brothers. Now, if you haven't heard me and like every other booktuber rave about this book, it is short, it is sweet, it is a really unique first contact book that I don't think anybody else has ever written anything quite like this book. I mean, the aliens have already come and gone before this book starts, and we were such ants in a picnic of their roadside picnic that they didn't even notice us. And we are left with this feeling of nihilism in this book in such a deep way. And this book was incredible. It's inspired quite a few video games and TV shows and a movie, and there's a lot of really cool things about this book. The Strugatsky brothers wrote quite a few other science fiction novels, including Doomed City, and that one is one I'm hoping to get to soon. Now, the next book on this list is going to be Dmitry Glukovsky's The Metro Trilogy. I have read 2 of the 3 books, and while there is some tonal differences, all of the books are in a post-apocalyptic world in the future where the remnants of humanity are surviving in the Moscow subway. And these books are incredible. They make a lot of statements about human society, what we're capable of. I really think that these books really wowed me in a way that I haven't been in a long time. I highly recommend the first one. If nothing else, they also became video games, which are really fun to play. Now, the last book in Russia is going to be a book called The Slinks by Tatiana Tolstoy. And yes, this is that Tolstoy. Tatiana is apparently some kind of distant relative of Leo Tolstoy, who wrote Russian classics like War and Peace.
God spoke through his pen.
What's really interesting is that Tatiana only wrote a single book, and it was a dystopian novel called The Slinks. I'm really excited. I've already got a copy of this on my shelf. I just haven't had the time to sit down and read it yet. Now, what you're noticing about all of the Russian books that we've talked about so far is all of them are very dystopian, all of them are very dark, and what Russian sci-fi does better than any other country that I have found is they really capture atmosphere better than any other book. I think what happened with the fall of the USSR and the rise of communism really seems to have affected this country pretty significantly, and you can feel that when you've read multiple science fiction books by the Russian authors listed here. I really felt like they all captured this nihilistic vibe. They're all very desperate for hope, but too scared to hope, if that makes sense. And they are incredible at this desperate despair that I feel like only occurs in Russian writing in an undeniable way. I feel like especially the Metro books really brought to life the character of darkness, which who would have thought that a setting would be a character, but somehow Dmitri did it. And these books were really, really interesting. So if you are ready to be a little bit more depressed about the world, then I would definitely pick up some of these Russian sci-fi books. But if you need something that is a little bit happier, I would probably recommend staying away from some Russian sci-fi. Now, the next country on our list is going to be Germany. And ironically enough, a lot of these books are books that were wildly different. Every single one of these books are books that I really enjoyed and highly recommended, and they're all very different in tone. The first one is a book that I have hopefully talked about many times on my channel, and that is going to be Quality Land by Mark Uwe. Quality Land is a fun parody satire novel about how computer algorithms like those that run Amazon and YouTube took over the world. And our main character is told that he wants something that he doesn't actually want. And he's gone on a quest to try to prove the algorithms wrong. Now, there is a lot of kind of dirty humor in this story, but there is a huge layer of subplots and nuanced themes that are just below the superficial surface. So if you can get through some of the silliness of this book, it really has a lot to say about our world and culture today that I think is highly worth reading. I also hear that his sequel is finally going to be translated into English, so I might get to read it soon. Next is the book The Swarm by Frank Schatzing. So this is my very first 5-star book of the year, and I absolutely enjoyed it. Despite the fact that it is a hefty chunk and the first half of the book is a little bit hard to get into, the rest of the book goes by fantastic. This is an eco-thriller book about the world coming to disaster if we don't solve the problem. This book follows 4 point-of-view scientists that are seemingly unrelated and in different parts of the world, watching whatever it is they're doing or studying go slightly wrong. And then over time, it all starts to come together to make a bigger picture. What really made this book for me is the fact that the info dumps made me feel smarter. It was like reading a textbook that I actually enjoyed and came with a story. I cannot tell you how incredibly impressed I was at the end of this book with how everything came together and how engaged I was with the story. The pacing of the last half of the book is perfection. And I really, really enjoyed this book. There is also a TV show about this one, so I don't know what's going on with it, but I would highly recommend it. Now, the last book in Germany is going to be a book called The Carpet Makers by Andreas E. I can't say his last name, but this is supposed to be an incredible dystopian novel about carpet makers who make carpet out of human hair. And it takes an entire lifetime to make these big epic carpets. Now, I'm told that this book is kind of a fix-up novel of a whole bunch of little short stories that come together to make a bigger picture, and it's supposed to be an incredible read. Now, unfortunately, I haven't gotten to it quite yet, but I do plan on getting to it soon. And I really wanted to include it here so that way it doesn't get forgotten about, but I hope to get to it soon. Next is going to be the country China. There are so many books that I could have picked here. I'm going to pick specifically 3, but slowly and surely there are more and more Chinese science fiction novels that are getting translated to English. So if you guys know more than just these 3 that I've mentioned here, please let me know in the comment section down below. The ones that I want to talk about today are, of course, going to be Cixin Liu's famous series, The Three-Body Problem. Cixin Liu has lots of other novels out there, so if you're a fan of this series, you may want to pick up some of his other work. Now, if you happen to be living under a rock and haven't seen the TV shows or heard ramblings about The Three-Body Problem, I'm going to leave it to Wikipedia to tell you a little bit about these. Suffice it to say that it is a very interesting first contact story that spans over 3 different books, and I have a lot of mixed feelings about the ending, as does it seems like everyone else. So we'll have to chat about that in my Discord or in the comment section down below. But this is definitely a series worth checking out, although I will warn you, their characterization is very lackluster. There's almost no characterization, and the way this story is put together and told is very different. Now, the next book on this list is one that isn't getting a lot of discussion, and I've put it back here in my shelf, and that is Waste Tide by Chen Shifan. So this story is featuring a specific island off the coast of China called Silicon Island. And this is where the Western countries pay to dump a lot of their trash and toxic waste. And the inhabitants of this island have been dealing with this for generations of their family and don't see any need to leave, despite the fact that outsiders come in to save them. This book really encompasses a lot of traditional way of life versus modern way of life, and also deals with an AI in a very interesting way. This book is also proof that it isn't all of China that doesn't know how to do characterization, because this is a very character-heavy science fiction novel. So if you're interested in some more non-Western science fiction, this one would definitely be one to pick up. The third and final Chinese science fiction book that I want to talk about is one that I've had my eye on for a while, and that is Vagabonds by Hao Jingfeng. And I'm sorry if I said that wrong. This book is a really thick one that is getting a lot of clout, and it's about a far-flung future where Earth has colonized Mars, and Earth and Mars have already had a big war, and now they're kind of in a cold stalemate situation, and a bunch of kids get sent from Mars to be delegates to go down into Earth. And when they return home, they find themselves pulled in between the 2 worlds, or the 2 planets. And they are having a really hard time with their loyalties and where they lie. This book is supposed to be a really fantastic one about what it's like being caught between 2 different worlds. And I'm really excited to pick it up whenever I can get a hold of a copy of it. So if you happen to know of any more Chinese science fiction that has already been translated into English that isn't one of these 3 authors, please leave me a comment in the comment section down below. Our next country is going to be Argentina. Now, Argentina is actually a little bit of a hard country to find books in, yet I find that I already have 2 Argentinian science fiction authors on my list. So the first one is going to be Tender is the Flesh by Augustina. I'm not even going to try her last name. This book is an incredibly astute, intriguing dystopian novel that I think is misunderstood. Now, I will tell you that this book takes place in a future where, for some reason or another, animal protein is no longer digestible to the humans And so they end up having to eat other humans. And they are living in a world where cannibalism is accepted. Not only is there some very obvious, superficial, significant vegetarian and vegan agendas in this book, but I don't think that's all there is. I think there is so much more in this book. A statement about society, a statement about how we're all out for ourselves. Is selfishness inherent, or can you learn to love someone else? There is so many nuanced themes in this little tiny thin book that I really think there's a lot of discussion to be had about this book, and I really think that it's not just a superficial commentary about the meat market. So if you're interested in checking out a really weird but very intriguing book, this one might be something that you would like. The next one is one that's been on my list for a while because of who translated it. Now, this one is called Kalpa Imperial, and it's by Angelica, last name starts with a G. It's a book of short stories, and it's translated by Ursula Le Guin. So I'm really intrigued by this particular author. Not only did she get Ursula Le Guin to translate some of her short stories in Kalpa Imperial, but she had a more recent novel called Prodigies that was translated by Sue Burke, the woman who wrote Semiosis. So she has two different translators who are also science fiction authors who are some of my favorites. So I'm really interested in trying to get a hold of a copy of these two books, but I've had a really hard time trying to find them in the wild. So I'm still working on trying to get them, but just based off of who translates them, I'm in for reading this author. All right, the next group is going to be the Caribbean. So there are two Caribbean authors that I want to talk about today, and I'm sad to say I really had a hard time with both of these books. They just weren't to my taste, and I had a really hard time relating with the characters, and maybe because of some cultural differences. So that's probably why it was really important for me to read these. But the first one is Nalo Hopkins' Midnight Robber. Now, this one was quite an interesting book that teetered on the sci-fantasy side of things because we have advanced technology, but we also have quite a lot of magical thinking going on. This book was really difficult for me to read. There's a lot of trigger warning topics in here. The character has to go through quite a lot of trauma that I didn't enjoy reading about, and so this book was really, really a hard one for me to get through. I'm kind of worried to pick up any more of Nalo Hopkinson's things because of how much trauma there was in this book. But I did also pick up a book by Karen Lord, who is one that I have had my eye on for a long time, and that was Big Beautiful World. Not only is this cover beautiful, but the premise of these stories are really interesting. However, I really had a hard time with this book. I found myself constantly a little bit bored, not able to connect to the characters, and very confused as to what's going on in the plot. Unfortunately, as I found out, this is, I think, the second or third book in a series that I hadn't picked up the first one in. So I think that could be some of the reasons why I was so confused. So I'm really hopeful that I will like this author when I finally find a standalone by her and will know that I don't need to read anything beforehand. So definitely take my low rating on that book with a grain of salt, just because it was probably due to the fact that I was missing a very huge chunk of that story. So the next country is going to be Portugal. This one is one that I'm really excited to talk about, and that is Jose Saramongo's Blindness. Not only is this a internationally best-selling book, but it's also a really good movie as well. This one is an interesting dystopian novel that is also kind of a parable about the nature of humanity. There is a small town where everyone in the town goes blind for an unknown reason, and so they become dependent on the government and those who can see to take care of them. They have to be helped with absolutely everything that they do in their lives. And you get to see whether or not humans are inherently good or inherently evil. And is there a middle ground or not. There is quite a lot of discussion in this book about people taking advantage of those in a lesser situation, but then there's quite a lot of capacity for human compassion and emotion and kindness. And there's so many interesting pieces to the story. I would highly recommend the book over the movie because, of course, the book is better. But the movie does do a good job of capturing the essence of what this book was about. It almost felt like the prisoner experiment, if you happen to know that experiment in psychology. And it's definitely one that will give you a fresh perspective. Now, the half of the country, the 7.5, the half comes from my discussion of France. And I'm not saying that France is only a half, but I have 2 science fiction books, but both of them are very classic, and they have both been published a very, very long time ago, so it only counts as a half, because as I found out on the Wikipedia page, a lot of French science fiction has seemed to lean a lot more towards graphic novels, and a lot of those haven't been translated into English. So I wanted to mention here, in case anybody knows of any French graphic novel science fiction, I'm really interested in trying to check some of that out. But until then, my placeholders are going to be Jules Verne, which I read 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, which I'm sad to say didn't really hold up very well for me in terms of it's just not quite modern enough. I think because I already knew the story, I already knew all the twists and turns, and I've known them since childhood. So I didn't particularly love this novel. However, I know that Jules Verne was a very important author for the genre of science fiction. The second author is going to be, of course, the gentleman who wrote Planet of the Apes. What an incredible movie series that is still going on now. I mean, what a very interesting idea that has really sparked the imagination of many generations. And again, a very important novel in science fiction, and yet not a very recent one. So I'm only counting this as a half because I don't feel like I gave French science fiction a real fair shot. So if you happen to know of any French science fiction, or you happen to know of any other science fiction that has been translated into English from around the world, please leave me a comment in the comment section down below, or let me know if you read any of these books and what you thought of them. Until the next video, you guys, have a good one.